I hope there's no one here this morning that doesn't believe that. That's what it takes. It takes Jesus. I probably would get an argument out of some people, but I don't like to scare people. I don't like people to be overly concerned, but we do need to be concerned. Next Sunday, the 7th of October, has been designated by some as Freedom Sunday. And one of the encouragements, and those of you that were here last Sunday night saw the pastor of the Skyline Wesleyan Church out in California say that pastors need the freedom to preach against the things that the Bible is against. Not people, but things. And he mentioned 3 of those things: killing of unborn babies, the gay marriage proposals, and the freedom to worship as we please and to do the things that we feel God has called us to. And I'm not going to go through any illustrations personally, but here's what I want to say this morning. We are at war. We are at war. Christians, we're at war. And it's not impossible that we as citizens of the United States of America will again be at war sometime in the near future. Let me just give you a little bit of a background here. Less than a year ago, in fact it was about 11 months ago, a former Secretary of State, Henry Kissinger, was interviewed by a New York reporter named Alfred Hines. This is what Mr. Kissinger said. He said, "If you can't hear the drums of war, you must be dead or deaf." Mr. Kissinger then added, "If you're an ordinary person, then you can prepare yourself for war by moving to the countryside and building a farm. But you must take guns with you, as the hordes of starving will be roaming. Also, even the elite will have their safe havens and special shelters. They must be just as careful during the war as the ordinary civilians, because their shelters can still be compromised." Well, it doesn't take too much of a prophet to say that war is imminent in some places. In fact, wars and rumors of wars are going on right now. Quincy Thomas, an author of a book titled The Study of War, lists the number of conflicts that each of the major nations have had since 1481. 1481, and his research ended in 1981, so that's 500 years, if my math is correct. In those 500 years, Great Britain was engaged in 78 wars. Spain was engaged in 64 wars. France, 71. Russia, 61. Austria, 52. Germany, 23. The United States, 13. China, 11. And Japan, 9. That's how many wars these nations were engaged in against somebody. This author also records that in 3,530 years of recorded history, 8,000 peace treaties have been signed, but only 286 of those over 3,000, almost 4,000 years, only 286 of those years were without conflict somewhere in the world, without war somewhere in the world. He concludes by saying peacetime is this: the brief, glorious moment in history when everybody stands around reloading. There are wars and rumors of wars. And as a nation, some of us are old enough to remember war. The Vietnam War, the Korean War, going back to World War II, etc., etc. If we're not old enough to remember those, Afghan War, the Iraq War, if we're not old enough to remember those, we must be pretty young. We remember some of those at least. War. I don't like war. I don't like the sound of war, but Jesus predicted there would be wars and rumors of wars. Listen, as Christians, let me put this this in here, as followers and not fans. The students in school are reading a book, followers, not a fan. We need to be followers. And if you haven't read that book, you ought to get a copy of it and read through it. It's an excellent book. We are currently in a world conflict, but wait a minute, hold it, listen to me. We're not fighting against flesh and blood. Ephesians chapter 6 and verse 12 says, "For our wrestling is not against flesh and blood, but against the principalities, against the powers, against the world rulers of this darkness, against the spiritual host of wickedness in high places." Well, I don't know if that makes you feel any better, that our warfare is a spiritual warfare and not a physical warfare, but I have a revelation. I really did have a revelation this week as I was studying through this and contemplating this and praying about this. Those principalities and those powers and those rulers of darkness, rulers, did you hear that? Those rulers of darkness and those individuals that are spiritual, what does it say? Host of wickedness in the heavenly places have bodies. That's right. We are fighting a spiritual warfare, but the spiritual warfare is embodied or is indicated through wicked people. Men, women, wicked people. I asked somebody this recently. If you knew then what you know now and you were alive at the time, what would be your sensitivity or your feeling or your reaction to Adolf Hitler? The people of Germany in 1937 elected him the supreme leader by an overwhelming majority. If you were in the Soviet Union, Russia today, back in the 60s when Khrushchev and some of the other rulers of the Soviet Union were in power, what would be your attitude and your reaction toward him? If you knew today if you knew then what you know today. Or you could take Saddam Hussein, you could take anybody else that we know about that embodied wickedness, that embodied evil, that was filled with these principalities and these powers and rulers of the darkness. I know what we would feel. We'd say we're against it, we're opposed to it. If we knew then what we know now. I get this straight. Get the tongue figured out. And we were back in the 1860s. Would you be for or against slavery? Well, obviously. Nobody's for slavery. Well, almost nobody. Almost nobody. What I'm saying is these principalities and these powers are not an ethereal, ghost-like thing. It is controlled by Satan, and it is Satan, and he is invisible, and we can't see his imps and his power, but he gets into people, and gets into governments, and gets into nations, and those are the ones that indicate the spiritual darkness. Billy Graham tells a story that I thought fit in here. He tells the story of a boxer that had a fight in the ring there, and came around to the fourth round, and the bell rang, and the boxer went back to his corner, and he looked at his trainer, and he said, "I think you ought to throw the towel in." He said, "I think I've had it." He said, I'm bleeding, I'm aching." He said, "This guy is just pummeling me to death." And his trainer said, "No." He said, "Nobody's hurt you." He said, "He hadn't even hardly touched you yet. Get back in there and fight." The boxer looked at the trainer and said, "Well, I'll go one more round, but I want you to keep your eye on that referee because somebody's hurting me bad." Somebody's hurting me bad. Keep your eye on the referee. Our battles are real battles, and the war is a real war, and we're in the war right now.